Eric, you wrote the Person of the Year profile that we just referenced there. What was your main takeaway from your conversation with Trump?
Well, I think Donald Trump is right now operating with a large sense of vindication, having won the election, having swept all 7 of the swing states, winning the popular vote, the first time a Republican has done that in 20 years. And he is preparing to go into office with a cohort of trusted loyalists in key positions in the cabinet, and he is trying to engineer acquiescence on the part of Republican majorities in the House and Senate so that he can carry out his agenda. Much of his agenda is executive-driven, and as you know, I've seen in conversations with him since April, he's really trying to concentrate as much of the power of government as he can inside of the office of the presidency so that he can remove the guardrails that hindered him in a first term.
So, Peter, he says he wants to pardon January 6 defendants. Meanwhile, the Justice Department's Inspector General just released a report debunking a lot of the right-wing conspiracy theories about that day, that it was peaceful protest and, as some have said, just people walking around. Will any of that matter in a month and a half to Donald Trump?
No, of course not. He's got his own revisionist history of what happened on that day and what happened in the weeks leading up to it and how it happened after that. And he will continue that regardless of what any report, any inspector general, any media outlet, any court, any other body might have to say about it. In his revisionist history, the people who attacked the Capitol, who beat and injured Capitol police officers, who threatened the lives of the vice president and the Speaker of the House, they're patriots. They're not insurrectionists. They're not criminals. They're good, God-fearing, Trump-supporting Americans who are being persecuted by the deep state. And that's how he's going to approach this. It's interesting, of course, he's also talking at the same time about putting in jail the people who investigated that incident, Liz Cheney and the rest of the members of that bipartisan House Select Committee. So these are the priorities he's outlining. Free the people who attacked the Capitol, put in jail the people who tried to investigate it.
Ali, we played a clip there from Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska. But what's the overall sentiment, if you will, that you're hearing on Capitol Hill about Trump's agenda?
I actually think that Murkowski quite nails it, especially in this era of putting up very controversial nominees for key cabinet positions and then ultimately expecting the Senate advise and consent to simply be a rubber stamp. There is certainly a lot of pressure on these Republican senators to just go along to get along, or else they're going to get a primary challenge. And while that's not a problem for Lisa Murkowski because she's 4 years off from a re-election battle, and having covered her last one, Trump's battle there to try to primary her didn't work at all. For other people, it could be a much more efficient process. I'm talking about people up in 2026, like Joni Ernst, like Thom Tillis, like Mike Rounds. All of these people are more independent-minded. They're at least willing to just pose some questions in the course of a process where they may ultimately get to yes. But it's clear if you look at the president's advisors, people like Corey Lewandowski, Stephen Miller, and others are popping up on every conservative cable channel and other avenue to make sure that these senators remember that Trump is the one who put them there, whether or not that's actually true.
So, Eric, this was not your first opportunity to sit down with Trump, but this time you described him as more subdued and less verbose. Give us some more details about what left you with that impression.
Well, you know, it's interesting because as he is preparing to embark on, you know, a radical second-term agenda, as far as just tone and the sense of what it's like being around him, he's nowhere near as defensive. He's nowhere near as combative. There's kind of more of an equipoise to Trump. I think he's feeling more confident and assertive than he has at any point in the past about the way he's going to be able to govern, in which, you know, he's not expecting to be faced with pushback internally, not institutional pushback inside the executive branch. I mean, and as you know, others have pointed out, you know, he is, and through his allies, engineering a sort of pressure campaign against the senators so that he can get these appointments rubber stamped. But, you know, you really did feel that he was also quite wistful, that his last campaign was behind him. He's not really in a fighting mode right now. He actually said, it was quite interesting during the interview, he said it's sad in a way, it will never happen again, referring to the rallies and trying to win the presidency.
Peter, your book goes in depth on Trump's first administration. After reading this profile, what are you expecting in terms of big themes in the second administration? We know immigration was a big one during 2016. He did not deliver on that in the same way that he does now. I don't recall mass deportation being as big of an issue as he is making it now. Of course, it was always build the wall. Now it's mass deportation.
Well, it's mass deportation in part because Biden's policy change this summer changed the situation at the border. Remember, for much of Biden's term, the border was being, overwhelmed by record numbers of people coming over. That has now been essentially stymied by the change in rules that Biden put in place, and the numbers of people coming across the border at this point are as low as they were when Trump left office. So he doesn't have that problem necessarily focus on. Instead, the problem, as he sees it, are the people who came over during the last 4 years and have been here for much longer, for that matter, and he wants to deport them. But you're right, he never did this in his first term. In his first term, he deported about a little less than 1 million people total over 4 years. That was less than Obama or Bush did proportionally, annually, and a whole lot less than he's going to do if he does all 11 million that he says he's going to do, much less 21 million. So it raises a lot of questions. How will he meet that promise? Will he, in fact, try to even meet that promise, given the resources that will be required? But I think what you're going to see in the second term more broadly is an expansion of the first. The things he wanted to do in the first term but were talked out of, were thwarted by his own people or by resistance in Congress or the courts, resistance that's not going to be there this second time. As we just said, the people around him are not going to be the conventional mainstream Republicans, some of whom were there in the first term and said, sure, you can't do that, that's unwise, that may be even illegal. Instead, he has people around him who agree with his agenda, who agree with his methods, and want to encourage and embolden him. And so I think it'll be a more, even though he in this interview, obviously, we were just saying he seems content that he won and maybe even wistful that they're not in a led election. I think he's going to be a pretty confrontational president in his second term. He's going to be trying to move fast because he recognizes he's really got about 2 years before the midterms and the lame duck status begins to kick in. And he wants to accomplish what he couldn't do 4 years ago.
Ali, what are you seeing that's different as someone who has covered Trump extensively in different iterations when he was a candidate, president, ultimately, ex-president, and now here he is president-elect?
I think how much remains the same. As I was reading that interview in Time, which was extensive and they got to so many issues, it gave an insight on the ways that Trump's ambivalence on so many of these issues, I think with the exception of immigration, he equivocates so much on all of these key topics. You ask him to pin him down on how he'll deal with Putin and Ukraine and Russia. What will he do with Israel and the conflict in the Mideast? All of these questions, he continuously goes and tries to say that he is trying to play all sides. He doesn't give a clear answer. And I think that the biggest difference that we'll see, as much as he hasn't changed, is the way that world leaders and domestic leaders react to him. Because even in a recent conversation I had with former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, I posed to him several of these questions about the ways that Trump has tried to be on a few different sides of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And he seemed confident ultimately that Trump could be a good broker on this. Now, a lot of world leaders will have to cater to Trump because they know that that's the way to get in his good graces. But at the same time, I do think that more of the political apparatus, both worldwide and also in the U.S., people are more wise to the way that Trump operates. And I think in reading that interview, that was the immediate thing that struck me. The more things change, the more they really do stay the same.
Eric, one of the things that has cast a large shadow over this past election season was Project 2025. You asked Trump about that specifically, and the connection that people he has chosen to join his administration explicitly have with this plan. Of course, he denied having anything to do with it, a little bit similar to what he said on the campaign trail. But would you be surprised if more of the playbook becomes reality in the next month? Is this him just saying he doesn't know about it while putting people who know very well about it in these positions to implement it?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if more people who are affiliated with Project 2025 end up in the administration. I mean, I asked President Trump, you said during the campaign that you had nothing to do with this, but at this point, at least 5 people who are affiliated with Project 2025 have been tapped for top cabinet positions. Doesn't that undermine the promise you made to the American people? He said no, but I think that, beneath the surface of this, I think Trump always kind of knew that there would be some connection because of the people who were affiliated with Project 25, who were also members of his first administration, who were close advisors, people like Tom Homan, who's his new border czar, who I spoke to for the piece as well. But I think one thing that was very interesting was that Donald Trump expressed a lot of contempt and frustration for Project 2025, that they had hurt his election efforts because they were putting out extreme ideas that he knew wouldn't play well with the electorate. I think Donald Trump was angry about that, and he said that he had expressed that anger to Project 2025. But I think he also knew that on some level that was a promise that he was not going to fulfill, that people who participated in putting together that policy document would end up with a place in a Trump second term. But it's true, by the way, that the manifesto was not under Trump's auspices, but there were always ties that existed.